to the countdown.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I hear a slight static in our stream. Did anybody else hear that besides me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is the joys of live stream, and I'm hoping that we have a really great live stream today. We're talking about cults versus cults. A lot of you guys actually signed up to watch this one. We have some guests here. We're going to probably work on the audio issues in the background. We did have a sound check before, and it was perfect.
Always the way.
Always the way, right? So I'm going to go ahead and set the stream and share the stream.
I've just shared it in a few groups.
Okay, great. And I'm going to get us set up on Twitter. And in the meantime, we can welcome our guests. Here we have, and am I saying it right, Cal?
Cal, usually, but
Cal.
You can say however you want. I'm remarkably indifferent.
Thank you, and welcome to the live stream today here on the Glass Table Live. And then we have Andrea.
Hi.
And Mary Byler.
Hi.
Hi.
So as you can tell, that our taglines are a little different today. You can kind of see what all of our ex-religious are, and for some reason, I don't know why it flipped mine back. I have to flip mine at another time. So let's see who we got in the comments. Yes, Susan says she does hear an echo.
Oh.
So what I'm going to do is, why don't we go around the glass table and tell all of our viewers. You're probably familiar with, Emma and Molly and I, but for those who may see this live stream in another, venue or another group or something, and you don't know us, we're going to go around the glass table and talk about the religion we came from and why we left. Right? So we'll go ahead and start with Emma, and we'll come back around to me, and I'm going to work on some audio issues in the back.
Okay, well, basically my granddad was the original Jehovah's Witness in our family. So my mum was kind of brought up in it. She left at 16. She had me, my brother and my sister. And then she decided to go back to the religion when she was 24 and got baptized. Married an older guy. So then I was brought up in it. When I got to about age 18, 19, I started leading a double life. I didn't like the rules. I wanted freedom. I wanted to go out, do what I wanted. I was always in trouble for the way I dressed, people I was hanging around with. So when I got to about age 21, I was like, I can't do this no more. I don't want to go to the meetings anymore. My parents told me I needed to move out so I wouldn't influence my brother and sister. So I ended up moving out within 4 weeks. And I tried to fade away. I had the elders camping outside my house on the doorstep, chasing me up the road. We need to speak to you. We need to speak to you. I refused to speak to them, and then eventually I got called into a judicial because I got grassed down for having sex, and they said if I didn't go to the judicial, then my mum and stepdad would have to go in my place. I didn't want to put them through that, so I decided to go. There's like, are you repentant? No. You're going to do it again? Yes. Fine, we'll have to disfellowship you then. So that was like nearly 24 years this month. So I was like, see you later. And I knew that once I left, I was never going back. So that's my story. Who's next? Molly, you're next on the...
I guess. So as you can see, I am also an ex-JW, and my story is a bit different because I wasn't born in, but I was indoctrinated at 5, and then I was indoctrinated alone from my family. So my blood family was like worldly people, as JWs would call it. They had nothing to do with the religion at all. It was just me from age 5 up to like 15, 16-ish. And I left because my mom followed me and caught me doing Jehovah's Witness stuff, and she locked me in our house. And I was alone. I had brain cells that started working, and those brain cells came to the conclusion that it's bullshit. Other than the realization that it was very like abusive and repressive for me to be there for various reasons, like mainly as a female human being, and then secondly because I'm asexual, and Jehovah's Witnesses really push the idea on you that you should like get married and pop the kids out one after the other, even though they don't really ban contraception and all that, but they really encourage to have kids. As I guess Emma and Spencer can attest to that, like they really encourage you get married at 18 or as soon as you can, and then just pop out the kids, increase the numbers, and get some good JW kids in the system. So being away from it just did its magic, and I have been out since then, which is 9 years this year, around my birthday.
Cool. So, Cal, you're next on the agenda.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. So, yeah, I was born into the LDS Church. My grandfather was a member of just a whole bunch of different religions growing up. He was in just a whole bunch of them, and he kind of settled in when he around when he married my grandmother, and then just by nature of him being in it, he raised everyone else in the family into the religion, and it's kind of stuck with it. He keeps insisting that he's not that into it, but he's pretty into it. I left the church when I was about 14 years old. I'm going to be honest, I never put too much thought into why I started to leave, but I think it comes down to just I really started thinking about it, and certain things like the fact that every religion out there, namely Abrahamic religions, but most of the religions always say, hey, I'm the correct religion, your religion is false. And I figured, hey, that can't be true for all of them. And then I just started to think about it more and more, and just how kind of subtly repressive the religion is. And, started thinking about just, it wasn't for me. And so I just stopped going to church. And as things happened, people weren't too happy about it. My family wasn't especially happy about it, but they kind of just let me do my thing. Probably thought I was just going through a phase. I don't know. Couldn't tell you. But as things happened, I finally got out.
All right, Mary, did you want to go next? I think you're on mute.
Yep. Okay. Hi, I'm Mary. I was born into an Amish family, and I read the Bible multiple times, and then I had questions, and they told me that, I'm reading the Bible too much, and you shouldn't be questioning that, and because I can't possibly comprehend what's actually being meant by that, because I'm a woman. And then when I didn't have an opportunity to actually leave until I was 19, and it had gotten to a point where I believe my sister was being abused sexually, and she was 6 years old. And at that point, I had the resources to leave, and I left, and I reported the abuse, and her abuser went to prison. It was a fact. My family and my community shunned me, and that's kind of my story.
All right. And Andrea, am I saying your name right? I'm saying Andrea.
That's how I pronounce it, but I don't really
Okay.
care how people pronounce
Okay.
it. So
I just want to make sure I got your name right.
it's not a thing. So I was born and raised right in like the heart of the Mormon world, or ish, not because Salt Lake, while that's where the Mormon headquarters are, it's like halfish actually Mormons in the population at this point. But it was like 90% Mormon where I grew up in little Spanish Fork, Utah, the whole Provo, Orem, that kind of area. And yeah, long line of Mormons. And I actually grew up loving being a Mormon. And it wasn't until, my 30s, but like mid 30s, that I started to go, there are some things that I deeply disagree with. I just don't believe God could work that way. And I had lived my entire life spending lots of time with people who are not members and talking about different religions and all of those things. So my walkaway story was when some sexual abuse stories came out that really did prove quite well that it wasn't just within local. It wasn't a problem just within local, but that there were ones and many instances where even the prophet, general authorities, literally the very highest parts of the church, that were not only hiding the abuse, but they were enabling the abuse and hiding away the victims while continuing to promote the perpetrators. And I just, that was it. Nope. I'm not touching that. You don't get my name. You don't get my support. And I was out. And so really and I had already kind of seen and gotten to realize that there were a few culty aspects. But yeah, a lot of that wasn't realized until after I had left. Oh, Spencer, you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, you guys, for sharing all of your stories. I was just going to say that if you guys are just joining us, we have 2 ex-Mormons on the panel, ex-Amish, and 3 ex-Jehovah witnesses that are on the panel today. And this live stream, we are talking about cults versus cults. And if you're just joining us, we're going to, in a moment, define what is a cult, because a lot of people use that term freely in talking in connection with religion, and that's not always the case, that everything is, or every religion is a cult. Then we're going to go around, well, we're doing that right now, going around the glass table to share our own stories of the cult and what made us leave. And then we're going to lead off with some rapid fire questions about the cults that we were in, and we're going to take questions and comments from you guys. So if you guys have any questions for anybody on the panel or about the religions that are being featured today, go ahead and shoot. You have 6 experts, former members of the religion. For me, there was not one thing that made me leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. It was a accumulation of things. But like Andrea, our religion became forefront in the news with the sexual abuse. And I think if you followed our streams, I've been open about the sexual abuse that I endured, although it was unreported. And we've been very open about our own stories here on the glass table. But when those abuse stories started hitting the papers, and I didn't see, and I was observing how the religion was handling these cases, almost hiding them, I didn't realize that they were settling some of these cases, and just listen to stories of other survivors. It started to bother me, but that wasn't enough to make me leave. It was also some doctrinal issues that I had, that a pioneer, I think Mormons call them missionaries. They kind of like missionaries, but pioneers friend of mine started questioning the doctrine, and then the rest was history because I was actually going to try to help her on the site, you know, to try to get her to not apostatize, and I end up apostatizing. And so that would be my reason. There was, like I said, it wasn't just one thing. It was so many things. It was the no blood doctrine. It was the shunning that I endured after I started to change my mind and was kicked out of the religion. And then their policies on sex abuse. We're all familiar with the 2-witness rule that we are all fighting against, which that is unique to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you guys are joining our stream or are not really aware of what that is, Jehovah's Witnesses require 2 witnesses to child sex abuse before they were reporting the abuse, and in some cases not reporting at all. So that's a little bit, I guess, a little bit of background about us on the panel. Why don't we go ahead and get into some other things, like some questions? Yay! Who wants to start? Crazy stories from your ex. Cal, didn't you say you had a crazy story for me? What were we talking about?
So I believe that I was going to tell you just about some strange practices that happen in the church.
Okay, that works.
One of the bigger ones, and I was asked on, I believe by Emma actually, because of certain questions that youth get asked when they get temple recommends. But something that I figured I'd mention here is a practice in the LDS Church of what they call baptisms for the dead, and it's just as strange as it sounds. So inside the temple, and this is the only part of the temple where people who are not full of age members are allowed, is this almost like a basement. In this basement is a large tub that sits on the back of, I think it's 12 ox, like statues of oxen. And what goes on there is that the church has a list of, I guess, just every human being who is not a member. I don't entirely know where they get that list from. Andrea, maybe you could pitch in there. I have no idea. But what happens is you go in there as a 12-year-old sometimes, and you're expected to be baptized again for people who are dead so that they can get into heaven.
Wow.
Like, regardless whether or not that they were baptized in life, regardless whether or not they knew the church existed in life, you were expected to do a baptism for them to get them into heaven.
Okay, you know what, Council? I think I remember reading something in a newspaper where people, I guess, of people that were being baptized, like their dead loved ones, they didn't even have permission when the church was baptizing certain. Is that true? Like baptizing some of their family members and they didn't have permission to do it? Like, so they were going as far back as like some well-known famous figures.
So that wouldn't surprise me in the least. But as far as I know, I think the only 2 reasons you wouldn't get a baptism done for you is if it was like specifically asked not to happen via, like, I think an immediate family member, or I think Jews. I think Jews weren't allowed to get baptisms for the dead. Andrea, I don't know if you could pitch in with that, but I think I remember that.
Yeah. So early on, because the church really just wanted it done, for everybody and anybody, and so they really didn't have any rules. There's a way that the way they get the names is not just every person. You have to do a lot of research, and you have to show, like, date of birth, date of death. There's a few things and stuff that you have to do to submit names, but there are people that, like, that's basically their job to do. And a lot of members will spend, especially stay-at-home moms, they'll spend hours every day working on these ancestry lines to submit names for the work for the dead. And it's not just baptisms; it's their eternal marriages. Mm-hmm. It's just all of their temple work, really, just all those ceremonies. Anyway. But then the church got some really heavy, criticism for the work that was being done, especially because they found out that Some famous people like JFK, JFK Jr., Disney, Walt Disney. Anyway,
Right.
and not only was their work done without anyone, permission or anything like that, but it was done multiple times.
Mhm.
So, but also the Jews, the victims of the Holocaust, quite a few people had taken upon themselves and felt like this was their mission of love to do this. And I understand, I mean, within the Mormon doctrines and understanding, it is genuinely a loving thing that they are doing and offering. And the understanding within the church is that the work is not done and then that means they absolutely are baptized and part of the church, blah, blah, blah. It's simply done as an opportunity for them to accept, in death, for their spirit to accept. But, totally understandably, people got really, really upset with that. And we're like, look, we're not okay with this. We don't know about your religion. All we know is that they were not your religion, and this isn't okay for you to just do that. So now there are some pretty clear rules about all those things. Anytime you go in to the website where you can submit that, it has all of the rules about what they can do. That does not mean that people don't break those rules, because people do. And there may even be, rules breaking that is known, anything like that. But the actual official rules are that they cannot do it. You can't do any work for the dead if they have a living relative within 1 or 2 generations of them. Things like, so they have to be someone who is fairly long dead. They have to, unless if they're recently dead, they have a family member who is a member of the church that wants to do it for them, and they give the permission.
That's kind of upsetting when you think about it, because they're doing it only to the long dead, because then no one alive can bitch about it. But it's something that you mentioned is talking about, especially single mothers, which there's a lot of in the LDS Church, especially here in Utah. But a lot of the people in the church, the LDS Church focuses very heavily on genealogy and ancestry, and almost every Mormon I've ever met, they have. I'm looking at in my room right now. It's something my grandfather commissioned from the church, where they'll search through your entire history of your family and go back your family line, however many generations, just to have. They focus really, really heavily on that, genealogy stuff. And even down by the temple in my town, they have a whole building that's just singularly dedicated to that, scouring records and tracing back everyone's genealogy. And a lot of that does go to the baptisms of the dead. But, and one of the things that you don't think about as a young Mormon is cults. But when you start to, because it's just a normal church, it sucks. You go 3 hours on a Sunday, it takes away from time you could be doing literally anything else. And then while you're there, you're not thinking about it. Your church has a basketball court in it. That's kind of cool. But then when you go to the temple and you're in a room that's entirely painted white and everything's made out of marble, and there's 12 statues of an ox with a giant bathtub on top of it, and then you have to stand in there with an old man, and he grabs your arm and says, "Do you, John Smith, accept this baptism?" And then you get dunked underwater. Yeah, it's kind of weird when you think about it. When you start to use your noggin, that's a little peculiar.
You know what? It's not until you leave that you start to set in that, wow, I can't believe we did that, or we used to do that.
Well, even when I was in, and I was pretty devout at the time. I mean, I lied directly to my bishop's face when I got my temple recommend, but even then, I was still pretty into the church. But even then, I remember thinking, this is really strange. I don't want to shower next to grown-ass men.
As well, I asked you about it, Cal, because I learned through Sam Young about that they'll ask kids sexual questions when they're 12 or 13 to make sure that they qualify to go to the temple, and that's why he objected to that, and then that's when his problems started. And then obviously I'm not sure whether he got excommunicated, but he ended up leaving. overhears young daughters being sexually questioned when they were that age.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get Mary in here. Mary, do you have any unique practices, strange teachings that are unique to the Amish?
God.
Experiences? Is it a lot?
Where would you like me to start? I mean, do you want
I
me to
don't
talk
know.
about the strange courtship rituals? Do you want me to talk about
Well,
the fact that about a month before I became nonconforming, my mom told me that if you get married, you have to do everything that your husband wants to and obey him in everything. And that includes sexually. Like, basically, you have no rights. You have no body autonomy, nothing. Or,
oh wow.
like, the fact of, like, that my egg donor, my bio mom, also believed that I was sexually assaulted as a child because I didn't pray hard enough, or because I didn't really believe, or whatever it was. Like, just, and let's not talk about the clothes or the fact that, like, when Carl was talking about having these big statues or oxen, like, we were not allowed to have any of that because that is a graven image, and that would be considered a sin. Like,
You know, you
just
mentioned
weird stuff.
we
Or,
talked briefly before the stream, and you mentioned something about how the practice of, is it incest or is common? It's not incest. Is it
Inbreeding.
inbreeding? Thank you.
inbreeding. Oh, the fact of, like, the whole, so the Amish people came here from Europe, and by the way, like, you can trace my ancestry all the way back to, like, who actually came over here in a boat. They have books that are devoted to genealogy like that. But there has been no introduction of new blood, and because of that, they're so inbred that they have, like, their own genetic defects that happen, and it's a metabolic disorder. They view that as, this is the will of God, instead of, like, thinking of it from, like, a scientific perspective. And by the way, there's multiple different Amish communities
Now,
for our
go
viewers.
ahead.
Just so you know, like, I lived in 5 different
Right.
communities. Some Amish may practice differently, but I speak on behalf of those 5 communities.
And I think Cal and Andrea, you were saying briefly that FLDS is different from LDS, and I think that's probably an important distinction for our audience.
Yeah. So you have Andrea. You look like you wanted to pitch in. Would you like to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, the FLDS religion, and it technically there's really quite a few. I mean, there's quite a few offshoots from the LDS religion in general that became their own religions. But then FLDS even has kind of their own groups that have broken off and stuff from fighting over, doctrinal bits and stuff. But there are some really, really fundamental differences. They practice polygamy because they practice polygamy, and because it's so many, they have multiple wives. But that, what do you do with the young men? So they'll excommunicate and kick out the young men in droves, and do whatever they can to keep. Well, I mean, not exactly whatever, but they're highly, highly abusive. It's an extreme, like, so the LDS religion is a fairly high control group. We have 3 hours of church on Sunday. We have activities throughout the week for different age groups to attend. So you're pretty involved. But within the FLDS, it's your entire life. It's your entire community. The police officers in the town that you live in, even if they're not actually members, they're in cahoots with the leadership. So you can't go to them to get help. Their school is not, it's a private school. It's almost all just religious indoctrination. They do not teach science. They do not teach history. They do not teach, the things that to us would be considered fundamental. Whereas within the general Mormon LDS church, almost everybody goes to public school. Even the schools in Utah teach the theory of evolution. That's not something that Mormons freak out about being taught. So there are some pretty big differences.
So I have a question about
I'm just talking about the actual like state laws and how that's done. There are lots of members that have issues with it.
So, and I mean, yeah, and that is true. I live, I'm not sure where you live, but I live in an area that's in pretty close proximity to Colorado City, which is where a large amount of Warren Jeff's FLDS. And I should say, because I don't think we have yet, the LDS Church stands for Latter-day Saints, the Church of Latter-day Saints. And then you have the FLDS, which are the Fundamental Latter-day Saints. And they are just a far more extreme. And it's like Andrea said, they live in entire communities that are 100%, they're compounds, basically. When you think of Scientology and their, weird compounds and stuff, it's that to a citywide scale. And you don't have, anything that isn't. And sometimes, I used to work at the Walmart in my town, and we would get FLDS coming through all the time. And they're the ones that you'll see. They have a uniform that they wear every day. Everyone always wears the long underwear. The women always wear like plain style dresses that they are, I believe, made to sew themselves from a very young age. They all wear their hair in a certain way. The men have to wear long sleeve shirts, even in St. George, Utah, where it's 45 degrees Celsius for 9 months out of the year. They have to wear the long underwear and jeans. And it's just, you see that from the youngest kid all the way up to, the grandmothers that come through. And like Mary said, with the inbreeding in Amish communities, there's so few people that are coming into FLDS communities that when they come through, you can just see on them that they are remarkably inbred. And you
Wow.
even if you don't know what to look for, you can tell that these people, there's just genetic things wrong with them, and it is kind of sad to see. But it's not just that they grow up in communities entirely consisting of FLDS, but they are nigh on forbidden from even speaking to anyone who is not part of the FLDS. So, me working at a Walmart a while back, I'd say, hey, welcome to Walmart. And they just eyes straight ahead. They literally cannot look at you. And like Andrea said, we all go to public schools, but when you're in an area like where I live, all the public schools, every single member of staff is, LDS. So even your teachers are going to say, hey, here's the theory of evolution, but, it may not be right. Wink, wink. And they kind of force that in everything. I had a geography teacher or a humanities teacher in middle school who would, it's humanities. You have to learn about other cultures and religions. And he'd get up there and he'd say, yeah, today we're going to talk about Hinduism. It's one of the biggest religions. It's not the correct religion. My religion's the correct religion. Anyways, here's Hinduism. And he would do that every single time with every single different culture or religion. So, Yeah,
but that's an area where there's a pretty big spectrum of what people believe. Because I can't tell you how many people I know who believe that evolution is the way God made all this happen.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
So yeah, like it's a whole spectrum. But it is true that because so many of the teachers are also LDS, a lot of LDS stuff gets slipped in all throughout school.
It's kind of a really subtle way that they keep you indoctrinated, really, because they just kind of, subtly push these people into becoming teachers, and then, the cycle of, indoctrination continues.
Mary, you had a question for the Mormon?
Yeah. So going back to talking about your education. So in 1971, there was a case where the state of Wisconsin had filed a case trying to force a Yoder Amish family to force their kids to attend compulsory education to high school. And what had happened is the right-wing Christianity movement went in and paid for attorneys. And then I forget the man's name, but some guy who was supposed to be an expert on the Amish came in and testified. And the Amish family actually won that ruling. And when that happened, what it did is it created this thing where Amish kids don't have to go to public school. They have their own schools. They have their own school books. The things that are published, it's kind of like what you guys were describing, where it's like, it's very indoctrination like, and all of that. Like, I only went to 8th grade until I became nonconforming. And then they had their own books that were published by their own publishers. They had their own teachers that also only had an 8th grade education. And they were generally like just somebody who had just went to school and finished their 8th grade and then became a teacher because the church needed a teacher. And it wasn't necessarily that the teacher actually knew how to do the work in the workbook. Like, we had teachers who would literally say like similar things to what you were saying, is like, oh, hey, here's this or whatever, but not really, because we didn't learn any science. We didn't learn any health. We didn't learn anything about most of the history. It was very like very minimal, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So
Well, you know,
is that
that's
something?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mary. Go ahead.
Do you think that like some of that was influenced by that decision? Because that it was kind of like the general society putting it out there. Is like in the footnotes of that ruling, they had written that the Amish people do not commit crimes. And so it kind of like created a situation where general society looks at the Amish like they're on this pedestal and they can do no wrong. Do you think that affects the Mormon church as well?
Well, I can't speak to that like for sure. What I can say is, one, the you know, like I said before, the way the FLDS church handles it is very, very different. The laws in Utah and the majority of the FLDS is actually like just barely over the border into Colorado. But the law in Utah is you can homeschool and all you have to do is once your child is of age, you state that they're going to be getting X amount of time being educated, and like that's it, and that you find that they're being homeschooled. So how you do it, what the what they're taught is not in any way checked on or anything like that. In Idaho, it's even more lax. In California, it's so the state laws have a lot to do with some of that stuff. But within the Mormon, the regular, like the main LDS church, they're actually really they hugely encourage education. So it's actually really uncommon for LDS kids not just to go to public school and get the regular public schooling education that's standardized now pretty much nationally, but it's really rare for them to not go on to college.
Speaking
Even
of
if
college
it's
and higher
a couple of years.
education, I think that's a really good topic for us to all talk on, because that's one of the things I admire about your cult, your ex-cult or whatever, was because in the ex-Jehovah Witness cult, and we're going to actually go, it's now that we have Tyler, thank you for joining us. We're going to actually go into talking about what we mean by cult, but in a minute. But we were discouraged from higher education. And not only were we discouraged from higher education, I remember me personally having to feeling guilted into dropping out of college because I was setting a bad example, because the leaders or the elders felt that I was giving a bad example for other young people in my congregation, although I was pioneering, which is equivalent, I guess, to the missionary work that you guys do in the Mormons. But still, it was a problem. So, I mean, that's one big difference I've noticed between the Mormon religion and the Jehovah Witness religion is their ideas on education. And there were a lot of Jehovah Witnesses in my community who homeschooled as well. And you'll find ex-Jehovah Witnesses, a lot of them come from homeschool families. Now, they didn't have like a curriculum per se from the Jehovah's Witnesses, but I know a lot of Jehovah Witness parents who would incorporate the watchtowers and, you know, literature from the religion in the curriculum for school. So, I mean, it's science, math, you can almost forget about being, you know, on the same wavelength as everybody else who's actually in school, because they are focused not only on doctrine outside of schooling, but they've incorporated in the schooling curriculum for the children. So anyway, Tyler, thank you for joining us. Can you hear us really well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I just want to make sure because we are having some sound issues today, y'all. So we are going to go into definition. We probably should have did this kind of kick it off, but we had some sound issues before, to talk about what we mean exactly by cult. You know, some people believe that just because religion in itself is a cult. But Steve Hassan actually has a bite model. Is anybody on our panel? I think everybody on our panel is probably familiar with that. I'm going to actually flash it across the screen here. What makes, so, because somebody maybe, I don't know, talk in their own words, what makes our cult, why are we calling our particular religions cults? As opposed to just religion, what makes it different? I think for me, if I had to start off, is I remember looking at a meme saying that to tell how you can tell whether or not your religion is a cult or not is based on what happens after you leave and how they treat you. And we have a few ex-Jehovah Witnesses on the panel. We are very familiar with the shunning and excommunication practices that Jehovah Witnesses practice. So, yeah.
If I may, just real quick.
Yeah, go ahead,
just
Kel.
one sentence here. So there's a comedian by the name of Joe Rogan, who you may or may not have heard of.
Yeah.
But he has a bit on one of his comedy specials where he says the difference between a cult and a religion is you have one guy who's completely insane and they believe something remarkably out there. And in a religion, that guy's dead. So
right.
That was his definition. But all right. Sorry, I just wanted to pitch in with that. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Casey Allen, for joining us from Twitter and Periscope. We just started streaming to Periscope last week. Is Christianity a cult? That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring out the bite model, because a lot of people will say that Christianity or maybe the Islam and that they're a cult. But if you notice at the bite model that Steve Hassan uses, he talks about behavior control, information control, thought control, emotional control, and he actually lists some things under there. Like, for instance, for behavior control, he talks about how religions, if your religion promotes dependence and, you know, obedience, or acts that you modify your behavior with rewards and punishments, whether he has listed here if they exploit you financially or they restrict your leisure time and activities. I think a lot of us could probably attest to that here as ex-Mormons, maybe ex-Amish, and ex-Jehovah Witnesses, especially if you were born in. Do you guys call it born in as well? I know Jehovah Witnesses say it. We say it.
Like, yeah, born into, raised into.
Raised into, yeah.
Born into is the common.
Officially, it's called born under the covenant or within the in the covenant.
Okay.
Well,
Covenant
sounds less culty.
there's Amish people do have one fundamental difference is in where they do not recruit. There's very few people that will actually go attempt to join an Amish church, and generally they are never ever fully received into the fold because they were not born into it. But yes, I call it born Amish, and I call myself more non-conforming because I don't conform to their ideology, but there are things that carried on over that are still present today. Like, we lived in a lot of fear. There was always the fear of the devil, the fear of going to hell, the fear of, like, you're going to burn forever and ever and ever, and there's going to be the great reckoning, the microchip fear, stuff like that.
I think David in the comments is actually, I'm sorry, it's kind of covering up the screen here, but he said I call it fogs, fear mongering, obligation, burden, Guilt tripping, shame blaming. Ex-Scientologist Mike Reinders stated it well by saying that the difference between a religion or faith or belief versus a fine cult is how they treat you if you decide to leave. Because, you know, in preparing for our stream, we had a various Christian denominations, well, one Christian denomination who a person felt like it was a cult. You have to really understand what we mean by what we say cult. You know, it's not that, you know, with Christian denominations, for instance, for the person gave an example of a Pentecostal denomination being a cult. There may be some markers that within Christianity that they have to define each other as cults. But when we're talking about under the big umbrella here of cults, I think if you want to do some good research, I think Steve Hassan has some great books. Also, I think Leah Remini did a special. Go ahead, Tyler. Were you trying to jump in here?
Yeah, well, it just related to what you were saying, especially with the Light Model and Steve Hassan, and if it tied in right from when you went into higher education into defining a cult by the Bite model. Yeah, I was looked down upon as I went back to get some higher education through from the congregation, and it was honestly, I got a lot of it was some, I wouldn't say opposition, but had a lot of people really look down on me because why would I waste time trying to better myself and things now when I should just be looking to the future. And so, but it kind of feeds into, like you're talking with the Bite model, and when you have it up there on the screen, it's funny, like I've talked with different people, and honestly, of the entire list of traits within that Bite model, the only ones that I've seen that don't systematically at least apply to witnesses and some of the amended ones related to rape and torture and beating and murder and systematically depriving people of sleep. Aside from that, almost everything on that list, you can go down, check, 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 check. So it's very culty in the way it operates. But I just wanted to add one brief thing and then jump back off. But when you talk about Steve Hassan, I was actually really surprised to find out that he's actually religious, even after he escaped from the Moonies, and he's actually a religious person now. He belongs to a Jewish synagogue. So the point that he makes, though, is not all beliefs in that way are necessarily harmful, and that's where you have to make the differentiation. Things like hypnosis, that's a form of mind control. But if you utilize that to help someone stop smoking, lose weight, things like that, it's not always negative, so it really has to be balanced. But anyway, that's my take on the Bite model there.
And Andrea, you want to speak to the spectrum of religion? I to the person who asks, is Christianity a cult? I just want to say, in a nutshell, I would say no. And I would say personally no, because for a few reasons, it doesn't meet the Bite model. And also, you have some, I would say that there are some denominations within Christianity that may meet the criteria of being a high control group, but not necessarily a cult. Go ahead, Andrea. You said there's a spectrum.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you take the Bite model and the strictest understanding and definition that he uses, every religion has aspects that fit a cult, but it really is a quite large spectrum, and a lot. In fact, some people talk about how religions are basically cults that survived the high cult period into something that could survive multiple generations, and then during those multiple generations, in order to stick around, they have to start making some concessions and things like that. But there really is a huge spectrum. Even just within the Mormon church, my experience and the way that I was taught was deeply different, even though it was such a long ancestral, many generations of being Mormons. It was deeply different from the majority of people around me. I have a friend whose brother was kicked out of the house because he didn't want to keep his hair cut missionary length. and style, and had to go live for a whole summer with his aunt and uncle until he agreed that he was going to conform and follow all the rules. But for me, I come from a family, there's 4 of us, 4 kids, and 3 of the 4 have left the church. We still have really deep, close ties with my mom. My father's bipolar, so totally different reasons that we are not close to him. But like, that was never an issue. Us leaving was never an issue. I had friends that were not members, and that was awesome. And if I wanted to go to church with them, that was awesome. Like, my parents really encouraged that, even because they felt like the more you learn, the better equipped you are to be a better member. You know, so and really all religions end up having that spectrum, and then you're going to have people within each of those that get extra culty, even if they're not within a group that's doing it. Like, we have some Mormon groups that have gone way off the deep end. They believe in zombies, and like serious stuff, but they're still members. They're still a part of it. And then we have people that just within their own, like, there was a movie years and years ago, back when I was a teenager, called Steel Magnolias, and the cute hairdresser joins some evangelical religion and suddenly can't stop praying, has to pray over every little thing, you know. So she was handling it regardless of what the leaders were doing it as a high control, high cult group. And it's just kind of interesting because, you know, within every ward, like within, you know what I mean? So there really is a spectrum, and I think we need to acknowledge that how each person's experience is going to be somewhere on that spectrum of just how controlling it was. But there's some of it in every religion, because there's always some limit to where, you know, and suggestions of where you should and shouldn't get your information from, of who you should and should not be spending your time with, of how you should be handling your emotions, what emotions are good or bad. Like, there's some of that in every single religion. It's just, is it this much, or is it like controlling your whole life?
Right. In extreme cults and beliefs. And so what we're going to do, in order so that our audience can get an idea of what our former cult kind of thought about some issues and things, we're going to go over some rapid fire questions. I thought it would kind of be cool that we kind of just answered them. I mean, we have like 4 extra Jehovah Witnesses on the panel, so we'll kind of switch off a little bit. Tyler, did you want to jump in here before we do that? I thought it looked like you wanted to say something, or no?
Just a little bit of my point, like Andrea was saying as well.
Yes.
There's a skill there, and it was just related to, is something destructive or not. If it's a destructive cult, that's a problem, but that's just the only.
Right. Okay. So now our next question, I guess, one of the questions that we have was, what was your cult's view on the LGBTQ community? I think, or their rights, if any. I guess most of the cults that were being featured here are fundamentalist cults. So homosexuality is just like a huge no-no, I would say.
Well,
but
when it comes to the LDS church, I can actually pitch in here a little bit.
Go ahead.
So, while it is still considered sinful to be LGBT in any way, lately the church has kind of laxed up just a little bit, probably because they got in a lot of big trouble a couple years back for explicitly stating that if 2 lesbians or homosexual males had adopted a child, that child would not be allowed to seek the church. They wouldn't be allowed to come into the church, even regardless whether or not they themselves are LGBT in any way, because their parents or adopted parents are homosexuals. They would not be allowed to join, and they got a lot of flack for that. So I think recently they've kind of adjusted it a bit. And as it is recently, when I was reading up, doing some research for this show, they are now kind of falling back on that a bit. So LGBT members can still be members but they're kind of not really allowed in the temple. And there's just some, some little things that they aren't exactly afforded as members. And they did say, specifically on their website, I believe I read, that they kind of encourage LGBT members to speak to their local bishops or, presidencies or whatever to kind of discuss the best way to go around it, because they do believe they're in the kind of this weird state where they do believe that homosexuality, and specifically homosexual sin, is or homosexual love is a sin. They do believe that it's a married couple's duty to have sex, and B, to show up and be members and to love one another. So they're kind of in this weird area where they just can't quite figure out what they think. So it's a very recent thing that they've kind of started to back off just a little bit, but they are still, if you have I think the current belief, as I understand it, is they're not a huge fan of you being in a homosexual relationship, but if you don't consummate it, quote unquote, then they're kind of more okay with it than if you don't. I don't know. They're in a strange spot with homosexuality and the LGBTQ community and as a whole.
Andrea, did you have any comments on that? As far as the official...
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Yeah, so the official position of the LDS Church is kind of funny, just because you have scripture, then you have canonized doctrine, and technically that has to be unanimously agreed on by the leadership of the church, but also voted on by the body of the church, because that's the rules back from when Joseph Smith started it. And so we haven't had anything canonized in a really long time. But the official position that they've put out there is that there is no sin in being LGBTQ, but there is sin on acting on certain things. Yeah. And they intentionally keep that vague, which I think is shitty, to be, perfectly frank, because it means that bishops can go, oh, so, he's got this boyfriend and stuff, but I feel like they're, being good, blah, 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 whatever, as long as they're not having sex of whatever, but then they're fine. And they can have pretty full standing. Might even be able to go to the temple. It just, as long as they're not like living together or whatever. Whereas you'll have another leader, another bishop, who says, no, if you do anything that I even suspect that you're even going on a date or you're whatever, then you can't do anything. You can't, so I personally believe they purposely leave it fairly vague. But the official position is it's not a sin to be that way or have those feelings. You just can't actually act on it in any significant way. Your children cannot be baptized without express permission. So if you are LGBTQ and you have children who want to be baptized, there's a whole thing you have to go through, and you may or may not get permission. But it is possible. I'm trying to think what else. But outside of that, there are people within the church that, of course, completely advocate for the LGBTQ community and want all of these things changed. And at the same time, my brother, who's gay, was teaching math in Salt Lake City area, and he was being so terribly harassed by some students, one in particular, that he kept bringing it up with the school administration and the district administration, and they would not do a single thing, because regardless of the official position, there's still a lot of very anti-LGBTQ, thoughts, beliefs, and stuff around all of that.
But I would have to say that even with that, that is more progressive than the Jehovah's Witnesses, because
Yeah.
there, when you say Tyler and Molly and why do I want to call you JW Emma? You can't. Not only do they not acknowledge that you have homosexual feelings, if you have that, you can. That doesn't. I mean, you're not. That's sinning right then and there. I mean, it's not that. Wouldn't you say, Molly? Go ahead.
I
I
mean,
mean, it's not like you can
I
have the
mean,
thoughts and still serve. Like if
like,
they knew that you were gay or practicing, I know, like with my friend, he couldn't have privileges within the congregation because they felt like he was still
right.
practicing and stuff like that.
Not just that, but in my experience, and I think maybe my experience would be the most up to date because I grew up like in the 2000s, so they're like teachings for young people kind of stuff is like quite fresh in my memory, unfortunately. Uh, but basically, the teaching was that just no, like no gay thoughts, no gay actions, nothing gay. Like unless you like purposefully decide that you will like forget about it.
But that's what I was saying
Basically,
about Jehovah's Witnesses versus Mormons. Whether you are a Jehovah's Witness in the 2000s, 1990s, or 1950s, the Jehovah's Witnesses have not changed their stance on how they feel about homosexuality. I
yeah.
mean, whereas Mormons seem to be a little bit progressive. They have, a vague, standing, and then they also allow them to have privileges. Kids get baptized. They almost acknowledge their that they're LGBTQ or even advocate for them. You would never find advocacy for LGBTQ within the Jehovah's Witnesses. Emma,
No,
were you
no.
about to say something?
Yeah, I think like a lot of the times though with witnesses, it varies comparing what area you're from, because I remember being told I left in 96 and I was under the impression that you can be gay as long as you don't act on it, and then that's when it becomes a problem. And we went on holiday and the congregation there actually had a trans guy, and I remember he answered up at the watchtower, and my stepdad, who's an elder, nearly fell off his chair because he's just like, what? Like, how can that happen? And then he spoke to the elders after, and they said, well, he's studying. He's not in a relationship with anybody, so at the moment he's allowed to answer up. But if he wants to get baptized, he's going to have to reverse transition back to being a male. So I think it just depends. Sometimes people are more lax in some areas in different parts of the country.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There we go. Do you
No,
hear a
that's
lot of
fine.
static all of a sudden in the line? I do.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
it's been off and on, I think.
Okay, and
all
so
night.
before we move on to our next topic, I want to get the Amish view here. Mary?
So, um, yeah. So personally, my family had a leather shop that was in our family for like generations upon generations. And I was around 4 or 5 years old, and I only know this because my biological sperm donor was still alive. And I had followed this lady around the shop, and I was like, when I grow up, I'm going to marry her. I'm going to marry a woman, blah, 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 blah. That did not go over very well. And that is when I first remember being molested and sexually assaulted. And that continued for the next like 15 years. And it all started with that incident. As far as like the church's official position, it's like not even talked about. It's so taboo. Like homosexual people are considered to be sinners going to hell. They're going to burn forever. So it took a really long time for me to actually be okay with that.
Wow.
And
So then
as far as I'm aware of, I have never heard of an practicing Amish person that is gay and it's okay. Or even like trans people, like it's literally not even talked about. It's a great evil. It's whispered about. behind closed doors.
So you see the spectrum here, even on our panel. I would say Mormons, even though these are all fundamentalist religions who technically, officially don't believe homosexuality is a sin, I would say that just listening to the panel here, that Amish seem to be a little bit more extreme. Maybe Jehovah's Witnesses, or maybe Mormons and then the Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know. You guys let us know what you think in the comments. There is our next rapid fire question before we wrap up our stream here is, was your cult always progressive on the matters of race relations? I had this question in mind because the Mormon guy that I told you guys before we started the stream that was just so nice and just was like Jesus-like, and I just love this guy. We had a little back and forth about whether or not the Mormon church now ever apologized for some of their practices in the past, and he kind of was going back and forth with me like they did, and I'm like, I don't think so. He's like, no, they did. I'm like, I don't know. So maybe you guys can clear that up. Yeah. For us about.
So
I know a fair amount about it, but what do you know?
So back in the day, for those of you who don't know, the LDS Church was founded in like the late 1800s. It's like maybe 200 years old. But, when it was founded, it was a very racially charged time in the country it was founded in, that being America. And I want to say it was up until the 50s. When I read about it, I want to say it went up until about the 50s, where black people, like, they could join the church, but people wouldn't be too big a fan about 78. it. And they couldn't go into the temple at all. They were, not very welcome in the church at all. And it took them a while. I want to say, I think it was up until about the 80s where the church officially put out a stance on it. Andrea, maybe you can confirm it.
Yeah. Let me take this.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it. I just know that they weren't fans of blacks.
I know a bunch. Okay, so Joseph Smith actually baptized several black people, but he was kind of funny about it. There was a black woman. In fact, there's a movie that's supposed to celebrate. It's a big Utah Mormon movie, and I don't remember the name of it, but it's to celebrate this one black woman that was basically adopted into Joseph Smith's family, was considered a sister, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, if you look at the details, she was not treated equally. It was not quite the same thing. It was definitely not as progressive. It was progressive for the majority of people for that particular time. But the second that Brigham Young got enough people into Salt Lake City, he put the ban on black people holding the priesthood. Mm-hmm. So there had not been a ban. There had not been very many black members, but there had been, and they had, a few, 4 or 5, anyway, a handful of black men were given the priesthood. The women had the priesthood for a while, and it was never actually officially removed. If you do the digging and look through all the literature. However, it was officially removed for black people, and because the LDS Church insists on certain types of things to only be able to go forward with a unanimous vote, the blacks were given the priesthood, or that was basically the ban was lifted in 1978, the year I was born. There were
that is
quite
like
a
really
people.
Recent.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know. And there were quite a few people who had been fighting, just like Sam Young is currently fighting so hard and got excommunicated for trying to protect children from, sexual abuse and sexual grooming, because the LDS Church genuinely is grooming children for these types of abuse, even if no abuse is actually happening because of the way that these interviews are set up. Same thing with the blacks getting the priesthood. People were being excommunicated left and right for fighting for exactly what the LDS Church eventually did, and then just pretended like it was all fine. And they allude to it being a mistake but there has never been an actual apology. There has
Okay.
never been any of the, and most of the documentation that the church has is like official papers. They intentionally have hidden on their website where you have to know how to find it or search for it. Otherwise, you're not going to see it. So they technically are transparent, but, you know, make it as difficult as they can.
Well, that's really interesting because as the light gets brighter, as we say in the ex-Jehovah's Witness community, or the doctrines change, they don't go back and retroactively unexcommunicate people because they've changed their mind about stuff. I mean, you just out on the outs. So now, Mary, no, I have not seen black Amish people. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, there is a reason for that, actually. Like, I always ask people that question when they talk about Amish people and race, because here's the thing. If you've never seen a black Amish person, what do you think that means? And basically, I was told the story of how in the Bible, I believe it was Noah and his sons, and one of them went into the tent and saw his father's shame, and then he was cursed. I don't know the English name of his son, but anyway, so he was cursed. And so there was a whole story that I was told about how his people were cursed and that's why they're black, like pretty much. Yeah, that one, the curse of Canaan. Personally, I don't believe that. Some of my dearest friends happen to be people of color, and it just is what it is. But in the same token, I personally have never seen a black Amish person because they don't allow people in like that. They don't accept people very much.
Wow, that is just interesting to me because 1978 is not that long. I know, like with when you were talking to Andrea, and then you saying that they don't allow pretty much blacks, period. I know.
Well, they don't allow people in, period. They have a very closed society.
Right.
But yeah.
But so even with the...
Yeah, we had quite a few black members before getting the priesthood, you know, why they chose to join as their own whatever. But we did.
See, I was just going to add in here. We were like obviously brought up to be non-racist, apparently. And I grew up with two black girls and they're my best friends, and I never saw any racism. So obviously, a few years ago, in my ex-JW group, it comes up in the conversation. And the amount of people that told me that the racism they suffered in the organisation, to me, is shocking. Like, some were even told that they couldn't go and give talks at certain Kingdom halls because they were black. And I was just like, whoa, this is supposed to be like the most non-racist organisation, and that people are saying that they had to go through that. It shocked me, like, how much it actually happened in some places. We lost Spence again.
Sorry about that. So I don't know how far we got with the Jehovah's Witness view on race relations. We know that they had separate congregations with blacks and whites during the time of civil rights. That was in the 60s. So they were in separate congregations. Like the blacks didn't meet with the whites down south. We have, if you guys are interested, I'll drop a link of the many quotes from the Jehovah's Witnesses regarding black people as being inferior or on a level with even animals.
Wasn't there a quote that everyone in paradise was going to be white?
Yes.
And male, I think, as well. White and male.
Well, females will turn into males or something like that.
Yeah, and they'd all be white.
Okay, so now here's the part. If you're wondering if your religion is a cult, this is probably a good measure to measure this by. Emma, do you want to lead us off with the Jehovah's Witness views on cult, excommunication and shunning, and then we'll go to Andrea and go around the glass table?
Well, basically, if you get found out for committing a sin and you're unrepentant, you'll get disfellowshipped. And that means that every Jehovah's Witness in your life will cut you off, friends, family, whoever. And they will literally walk past you in the street. I've been shunned by my mum and stepdad for 23 years now. They'll sit on a table in a restaurant next to me and act like they don't even know me. And I've been told to strictly only contact them in emergencies. But that kind of makes me not even want to do that anyway, because, you know, why are you going to be there just for me in an emergency? Like, you can go to a family funeral and they will talk to you just for that one day, and then the next day they'll treat you again like they don't even know you. So basically, you're treated like you are dead.
Yeah. So, you're wanting the Mormon version of excommunication and shunning? Well, so officially, the church does not have any doctrines or teachings to shun. However, there's a lot of things that basically scare people, or promises made that you know, because with a lot of promises also kind of comes the threat, like families can be together forever. They're supposed to be together forever. These are the things you're supposed to do. So then there's the fear of, okay, if something goes wrong and this person leaves, they're destroying the family. When I told my husband that I was leaving, he said, he freaked out and was like, "You're making me choose between you and the church." And I said, "No, I'm not." But like, we had to have this whole conversation about that. And so even though technically there's nothing that teaches that, it absolutely happens. And it happens to, you know, I mean, like anything, it happens to varying degrees. I have friends that when I told them, they were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm just so glad that you're doing what you need to do, and that this is, you know, what you feel is right for you and stuff. I totally support you. No big deal. You know, I love you anyway. Just tell me how I can support you." And others that immediately unfriended me, won't have anything to do with me. You know, won't let their kids, you know, and even my children, I have 5 kids, you know, that you shouldn't be talking to the kids. You shouldn't be, you know, like all that, unless you're trying to now re-get my kids into the church. You know, there are people who want to do that, whatever. And yeah, so it's much more across the board, like, you know, just kind of a mess. But there's absolutely teachings within the church that covertly encourage shunning. And the excommunication process is grueling. It's intended to be shameful. It's intended to make you feel as bad as they possibly can. I wish Sam Young was here because he could tell you about his process and how beautifully he handled it. I was not excommunicated. I chose to have my name removed and my, they say records removed, but really they don't actually remove any of your records. Yeah, but yeah, it's a grueling process. And if you're a woman, you are in a room full of 12 men that grill you with details. If there's any sort of hint of sexual something, they grill you on the sexual details alone. There is no other woman in the room with you. Yeah.
I thought 3. Jehovah's Witnesses do 3 men. I thought 3 was bad. 12.
Nope. Yeah. It can be, you know, 6. It can be, but yeah, it's a large number. You're supposed to have, technically, 1/2 of them are supposed to be there to advocate for the church, and the other are supposed to be there to support the person that's on trial. But in reality, that's not really how it works. They already assume that you're guilty. They don't, most of the time, they don't really know you that well personally. You know, sometimes they do. But yeah, they're there to make sure that the church is protected. And it's horrible. Yeah.
And I was going to be touching on some of the sexual connotations of certain things with the church, but you know, I guess we didn't get time for that. But if you don't mind, I could pitch in here really quick with the perspective of leaving from, you know, I don't mean to be rude here, but from a younger point of view, I left when I was 14, and they kind of make it your whole life. So, you know, when you're at school, most of your friends are also Mormons. When you're, you know, doing anything, you're mostly doing it with Mormons. I'll admit I was a pretty bad Mormon. I didn't go to a lot of the after church meetings or any of the young men, young women stuff. But they kind of purposely get you in, and it gets to the point where, once you leave, like Andrea said, you kind of get that half and half split where some people just don't really want to talk to you. But then you get the people who are just so zealous that, they feel like it's their duty to God, or, however they feel it, to get you back. And to this day, I left, coming on 6 years ago now. To this day, I still get letters left on my door from the presidency. I mean, I live down the street from my old bishop, so, it's a small neighborhood and everyone's Mormon. So I still get letters left on the door. My sister still gets them, and they're still trying to invite you to young men, young women's. They're trying to get you to come to young adult singles ward, which they do on purpose so that you can marry into the church, so that you could pay more tithe. Almost everything with the church comes down to tithing when you really think about it. But, it was kind of rough. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up anyways, but when most of them don't want to talk to you anymore because you don't go to church, and then you just get, the people who, come up to you when you're on the bus ride home from school, and they're like, hey, haven't seen you at sacrament meeting in a few weeks. You coming back? Or, is there anything we could do for you? Or, they kind of purposely try and just guilt you into coming back almost. But, that's going to change from person to person, ward to ward. But, that's from my own point of view of leaving, because I didn't officially leave like yourself, Andrea. I didn't, have a meeting or anything. I just stopped going. And like you said, the records, fun fact, the LDS Church owns like an acre of land up in Salt Lake where they have a giant underground bunker hollowed out in a mountain where they just have all your records from every single member on the planet.
Wow.
So that's kind of creepy. That's kind of Scientology-esque. They have all your tithing records, any trouble you've been in with the church, everything you've ever done officially for the church. So
just listening to the stories here, I can tell you what's different is that the Jehovah's Witnesses, we have a central governing body that there are no independent churches or breakoffs, or there are some breakoffs where from some of them, I guess, I don't know if you consider it, but I guess Jehovah's Witnesses is really a breakoff from the Bible students if you really look at it. But
like they still exist,
right, they still
exist.
Bible
Student Society.
So a action of shunning by the corporate office, you are literally shunned by everybody across the world. There is not a Kingdom Hall you can go to, and somebody will talk to you.
I should have mentioned as well, sorry, that
go ahead.
If you're disfellowshipped and then somebody who's still a witness hangs around with you, then they can get disfellowshipped for associating with you. So it'd be interesting to hear from the other guys here whether they get that same kind of treatment as well.
Well, Amish, what about the Amish? From the little I do know about the Amish, they do shun. And
so if I don't know if you can see this, but this is my tattoo that says shunned, because that is what they did to me. I have no regrets. This is kind of like, it's kind of a symbol because of how, like, when you were raised, like, the only people you knew and you were allowed to freely associate with was Amish people. Even if they harass you or abuse you or mistreated you, like, that was the only people you were really allowed to be friends with. So that was all you had, and that was all you knew. If you do what I did, which is when I had the opportunity, I actually ran away from home at 19. I had this covering that I was wearing, and I had a letter that I wrote to the ministry of the church. So each church district has a bishop, a deacon, and 3 ministers. And then the whole community in that area, like, for example, in Cashion, Wisconsin, they have 13 different church districts the last time I knew. So twice a year they get together and they do what they call a Dienelversammlung, and they write their new letter, or they update their letter of rules and stuff like that. Like, for example, one year, one of my brothers had a buggy seat cover that was green. And so one year, like, they came out with a new rule in their ordinance brief that was, you can no longer have green buggy seats. And so everybody had to go and redo their buggy seats because now green is a sinful color to have on your fucking buggy seat, which I don't get or understand. Women as a whole are never supposed to look men in the eye. They're never supposed to speak on a direct level to a man. Like, I've had some experiences and run-ins since, like, I became nonconforming. So in 2004, December 2004, my oldest brother passed away. And when I went to his funeral, they sent a circle of 12 men out to prevent me from actually doing a walkthrough and viewing him after I sat in a sermon away from the family because I was shunned and I was placed in the bond. And because I was in the bond, they know I can't be considered part of his family now, apparently. So they sent these men out, and I was escorted off the property because I'm not allowed to say my goodbyes to my brother. And then when my stepfather passed away, they asked me not to attend the funeral. And I was like, okay, that's cool. It's fine. But when my biological mother passed away about 4 years ago, like up until the point that I went no contact with her, she would still write me letters that were like, oh, there's no hope for your soul. You're going to hell. The ewige fire and Brenna, which is like a forever, everlasting fire and burning, because they do kind of have a doomsday thing that's going on. Some of the things that they like won't do is like they wouldn't sit down and eat with me. They will not like take anything from my hand. They're not supposed to take any money from me. They're not supposed to help me. And like some of the things that she wrote in her letters up until like 6 years ago when I went no contact, she would say stuff like, I'm praying that it's hard for you so that you will return to the ways of your youth, because you were granted this privilege of being born Amish, and so you should be Amish because that's your, that's what you're supposed to be. That's what God wants you to be. She also wrote me a letter that was basically talking about how my rapist was at her house for their time that they had, like one of their holidays, and how it's so shameful that there's no hope for my soul. Blah, 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 all this stuff. And that was kind of where I drew the line and said, I can no longer associate with you in any form, shape, or way. So yes, they do practice shunning. And in my case, they've never physically harmed me, but they did also do this thing where like I was being questioned because I still lived in the area for a while after I became nonconforming. They would call the sheriff's department, and my friends were being questioned and followed home from work because everything that happened in their community was my fault. Literally, like if somebody drove down the road and hit the gas or something and it scared their horse, they would call the sheriff's department and file a complaint. And so it just became a situation where I had to get out, and I moved away because of that.
Jesus.
That's ridiculous. So sorry.
I don't think Jesus had anything to do with it.
It's
ridiculous.
Force of habit. It's.
No, I bet that.
I'm sorry for you. That's very rough. Sorry you went through that.
Yeah.
And
No,
I would also like to say, so I left because of my sister. My sister was 6 years old when I left. 15 years later, I did go back and find her, and I said what I had to say to her. She told me never to speak to her again, and that I should have never come into her life. And then I asked if I could leave her a way to contact me, and she said that I needed to write it on a newspaper and place it on the floor because she could not take anything from my hand.
I hope one day she picks up that newspaper and contacts you.
Who knows?
But never give up hope. Like, I got my sister back after 14 years of her not talking to me, and she left the religion and contacted me and my brother. So I always say never give up hope, because more people are waking up now in these religions and cults than ever before.
That's beautiful, Emma. Thank you.
Yeah, that was part. You got quiet, Emma. Still there?
Sorry, I was going to say, you said you wanted to say something on shunning, and then I muted myself halfway through by habit.
No, just from what Mary was saying too, that was very much related to kind of my story. That was my sister. She's been shunned for a long time, and I actually still just have that hanging over my head. I'm still not officially out. I've still been approached to try to get into a judicial committee, is what they call our process. But earlier this year in March, I was the only person to attend my sister's wedding. No one else in the family was there. So yeah, so Mary's story was really tough. Like I hope that eventually, yeah, things turn around for you and you're able to reconnect, because I was able to reconnect with my sister last year, and that was one of the things that was amazing.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
So
Well, my sister got married about 2 years after I left, and obviously recently she told me that the elders turned around to her and said, well, you could have invited your sister. And I was like, well, that's a bit strange. Why would she invite her disfellowship sister to a wedding? Because I'll just have to like sit at the back anyway. It's just like...
It's an opportunity to further shame you, maybe?
I don't know, but then she told me, like, when I left, I feel for you, Tyler. She told me when I left, like, she cried herself to sleep at night. And it breaks my heart knowing that. But I knew when I left my brother and sister behind, and I hated the fact that my brother was 15 at the time, and it's making me, like, well up thinking about it. And I wanted to take him with me, but I knew legally there's no way I could have gotten away with that. And he said to me recently, like, I wish you would have took me. And I was like, I couldn't. But my sister was like 18, 19, engaged, getting married, so I knew there was no way like she would leave. But looking back, I felt so guilty because I walked away and left them behind. But I knew I had to go. I could not stick it out any longer. I was done. But it was still like, I still remember that day walking away. It's never left my mind.
Thank you all
Yeah, I
for
mean,
sharing
I
your
wasn't I wasn't even like baptized. That's what it's called when like you become a full-fledged, full-time. If you get out, like even if you're just studying and all that, but like baptism is that point when you become a full-fledged member, when you can marry, you can have the privileges and all that, bullshit. And I was getting ready to do that when my mother realized what was going on. And well, definitely not gonna defend her because she was an abusive fuck, but basically the thing is that I wasn't even baptized, so I couldn't even be disfellowshipped, but Jehovah's Witnesses who know me, like who were there in the Kingdom halls when I grew up, they would not speak to me. My adoptive family who raised me wouldn't speak to me, like after years of not speaking to me. And after I hid my adoptive sister from the police when she ran away from home from her abusive father and all that. And then she turned around, got married, went back to the Kingdom Hall, and started to shun me until this year because COVID-19 is happening, and now they reach out to anyone and everyone to try and get them back to the Kingdom Hall. And I told her, well, look, I'm an apostate, so unless you can answer me these questions in a satisfying manner.
So as you
I
can
have
see, there's sorry guys, I'm trying to multitask between life and live streaming. There's a range or a spectrum of even with shunning between all of these cults. And even within the Jehovah, we actually did I don't know if you can look at Emma's poster in the back there. If you're not familiar with some of the work that she did, where she says shunning kills, can you see it? It's a tribute to those who have been shunned. If you guys missed our last stream, our live stream, I believe it was last week or the week before last, where we talked about the effect of shunning within the Jehovah's Witness religion. Before we close out our live stream today, I had a few more questions, but I'm just going to pick a question out of the ones that I thought we can answer, and then we can all go and around the glass table and give closing thoughts, if you want to. I think this is a really big one. And Mary, I don't know if you want to start us off, Mary, on cult's view on sex and dating.
Ha. Wow. So remember I said I lived in five different communities, right? So in one community, like it was more or less, so they have their Amish youth groups. They call them singings, and they happen on a Sunday, and they have like it can range at the age that kids start attending the youth groups. In some communities, it's 16. Some of them, it's 17. Out of those 5 communities that I lived in, there was only one that started at 16 attending the singings. The other things that can range is like in some communities, when they have a date, so they go to the singing, and then at the singing, like they'll have the girls and boys separated. They'll do their singing for an hour and a half, depends on the community's policy. And then after the singing, the girls all go outside to like the washroom area where the laundry is done and stuff. And the boys go outside to the barn. And then the boys will have like 2 of them will come up and they'll ask this girl if she'll go on a date with this guy. And you're supposed to say yes, unless your family doesn't approve of that family. Okay. And then the boy will like pull up his buggy and the girl will go out and get in the buggy. He'll give her a ride home. And then here's where it gets crazy. So like in one community that I lived in, what they did is they would sit at the kitchen table across from each other and have a oil lamp lit. And they would sit there until like midnight, and then the boy would go home and the girl would go to bed. In another community, they would go upstairs. The girl would go upstairs to her room and get in her night clothes and lay in bed. And then the boy would go put up the horse in the buggy and then come upstairs and go to her room, get in his night clothes, and then they would bundle. They would practice what's called bundling. And they would spend there until like about 4 o'clock in the morning, and then the boy was supposed to go home. Oh, but no premarital sex, guys.
Just bundling.
Just bundling.
All right.
In another
well, we couldn't do no bundling. I want to know what bundling was out as the XJ dub. But go ahead.
That's some degeneracy for you. Some kudopornia.
Right.
Remember, premarital sex is a sin. Okay.
Right.
Okay. But then another community is like they didn't do the whole like the practice of bundling, but they also didn't sit at the kitchen table. What they would do is they would have a big chair in the living room, and then the boy would go in there and sit in the chair, and then the girl would come in and sit on his lap. Okay. Like,
can you just tell us what bundling is, though, please? Is that just like hugging or no touching, or
they're bundled in the blankets all night long?
So what, they just like cuddle, or like?
Is it like petting?
I think the gives me the idea of like when you're a kid and you roll yourself up into a sushi roll in your duvet, like.
But you're doing it with another person. These are teens. They have hormones.
I bet the awkward cuddle boners are really bad.
Okay, question for you, if you don't mind, because in the Jehovah's Witnesses, even if you're a guy or even a girl, whatever, but if you sleep with like your blanket or pillow between your legs and you have a wet dream, that's a sin. Is that something similar in this case? Like if you're
go to masturbate.
And
okay, so here's the crazy part. Like, you're not supposed to masturbate, but I sat in church and listened to somebody confess to sinning because he fucked his calves. Masturbation is sin, but anyways.
Oh my.
I hope he's going from having animals.
Oh Jesus.
I hope the RSPC I know who he is.
Well, I guess with the Jehovah's Witnesses, we had everything covered. We had lists of stuff you couldn't do. No oral sex. No, I mean, obviously, we talk about within the marriage. I mean, mission. Yeah. The only thing you could really do was missionary.
Well, we were only supposed to have sex to procreate. Sorry.
Wow. Okay, now that's interesting.
That's a common one, I think, is like a lot of religions, it's sexual intimacy is exclusively for the process of procreation. And I believe it's Orthodox Jews take that to just a whole nother level, but, you know.
Well, don't they class it?
Yeah,
Jehovah's
aren't they the
Witnesses
ones
as
who have like
homosexual?
those? Sorry.
I'm sure Jehovah's
You mean the sheet?
Jehovah's Witnesses class anything like oral or going in the back door as homosexual, so that's why it's not allowed.
When I was
Yeah.
still a ministerial servant as a witness a couple years back, I was removed from that position because my wife and I had engaged in either oral or anal sex.
Okay, well, we
Wow.
wasn't removed, but we were. My husband and I were reproved for it. I mean, as
I
if
was told by our circuit overseer. Yeah, I was told by our circuit overseer that I was following the example of the demon.
so yeah, because the witnesses police your bedroom. Now, do the Mormons police your bedrooms as much as the witnesses?
So
Had the underwear.
there's a common thing I've heard about in LDS meme circles, and I'm going to be 100% with you. I don't know where it started, but there's something. Andrea might have heard of this called soaking. And soaking is where two people who are not married, the man will insert himself into the woman, and then nothing else. He'll just sit there like that. And the idea is because he's not because he's not in and out, that it's not a sin. Now I'm going to say this: I've never in my entire life ever actually heard of anyone doing that, but I do know some people who probably would. So I don't know.
Okay, so we
Wow.
got soaking, bundling. What else? What else we got?
Well, I was
Well,
engaged. I was engaged to a JW guy, and obviously we had to have a chaperone everywhere we went. So I either had to have my brother with me or my sister with me because we wasn't allowed to be alone. There always had to be three of you. I wasn't even allowed to get in his car and go on a short car journey because they just presumed that we were going to stop off somewhere in the lay-by and have sex. Like, it was ridiculous, but there was lots of things that they consider, is it heavy petting, and you're not allowed to touch a boob, or you're not allowed to touch this or do that. You're not allowed to kiss for too long. But to be honest, we did a lot of stuff that
Wait, you were allowed to kiss?
Not for too long.
In here,
but
they taught us. Here they taught us if you kiss him on the cheeks before marriage, that's like pornea. Like
Well,
no, that's no, because
we was allowed to
Yeah,
kiss,
because
but there had to be somewhere someone stood there watching, which was very awkward. So
that's almost worse.
For us, it was
Like,
more
I
you couldn't
don't
kiss unless you were
So-
engaged. For us,
so-
like, if you were kissing,
You had to be
it was if
engaged.
you were engaged.
yeah. Well,
That's not a church rule. Not a Mormon church rule.
But I remember my stepdad sitting me and him down and gave us this pep talk about things you shouldn't be doing. Was like, yeah, we'd never do that, we'd never do that. And we were both sitting there thinking, well, we was doing that last night, but we're not going to say anything. So I did loads of stuff, but I just never confessed, or I was like, I'm not telling them. So
Oh, I confessed everything.
Well, that
I did too. I used to get in trouble just because I'm
Yeah.
confessing.
what you're saying there about an adult talking to you as a child, or not as a child, but as a youngin, about things you can and cannot do.
I was 20 at the time, so it wasn't like a child either.
So
I mean,
Yeah, but I remember.
And he
I
was like
remember they told us.
24 or 26, so like it was so embarrassing.
but that comes down to kind of the original thing that I had said. I forget where I said it, but where you had asked me to come on here, which is the temple recommend stuff, where you are. I was 12 years old at the time. That's when you first get the, I believe, Aaronic priesthood, and you're allowed to get your temple recommend. And that's when you sat down in a room with a bishop, who is usually a boomer white dude, and you have to sit across from this guy, and he's going to ask you, hey, are you keeping to the laws of chastity? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? And then they kind of get into detail with the law of chastity, where they say, are you masturbating? Are you watching pornography? Are you doing this or that? And by the way, that's the first time in my entire life that I remember looking a grown man in the eyes and lying. Hey, Pops, my grandpa's watching this. Let me go ahead and well, I have here a person I lived with. She was raised Mormon, and one of you asked me to grab her, experience here. So she mentions here, all this stuff where she was asked again by a boomer white dude at 12, keep the law of chastity, not watching porn, are you going to church, paying tithing? And then it comes down here. She was asked about her virginity, about if she masturbates. And then she also wanted me to mention this here. She was raped, by the way, towards the beginning of college. And her rapist, I don't believe it was, penetrative, but she was sexually assaulted by a man. That man, the church, she reported it to the church, and the church did not do anything about it. Not only did they not do anything about it, but he served a mission just about 6 months after that. So they let him do one of the most important things in the Mormon church, which is going on a mission. So even though it was on record that he had sexually assaulted her, she was not allowed to, nothing was done about it. He wasn't punished in any way. And in some ways he was even, borderline rewarded. Now,
members are told to report before even going to the police. Report to the church. Report to your bishop. Yeah.
So I think my grandfather is still listening because he just sent me a text message I'd like to read. I don't know if he's making a joke here, but he said, Baptists are not allowed to make love standing up because if someone catches them, they'll think they're dancing.
You know what? I think there are some restrictive Baptist sects that don't allow dancing and stuff like that. So
yeah.
Well, in the Mormon thing, and I think the Catholics do it as well, where it's the leave room for the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
We'll dance, and you have to dance like 8 inches apart.
No, I heard that.
I've heard that before. In a couple of towns in Utah.
Yeah.
It was literally law.
No one ever asked me to a dance because I'm, a fat neckbeard, so no one ever asked me to a dance. But so I don't have personal experience, but I did see it happen.
I was told. Sorry, I was told not to laugh when men are funny. Yeah. Like, and mind you, I was 16 tops when I left fully. Yeah. So I was like a literal child. And never mind the fact that old boomer men came up to me and said, sister, you should be more careful with the way you dress.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then second, when, we would have guests over, and that's was a usual and is a usual like JW thing to do here where I live. Like they would just get together, throw a grill party with other families with kids and just have fun.
Yeah.
Did they also tell you to laugh too loud?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're approaching the end of our stream. We actually a little over our normal stream. So what we're gonna do is go around the glass table, and if you have any closing thoughts or anything you like to say. I know I for me, I would want to say that if you are a current Jehovah's Witness out there doubting, you are not alone. There are a lot of people who are in your position who are still attending meetings and still feeling like they don't have a way out. There are a lot of extra Jehovah's Witness groups that you can join. Emma has one. If you are a Jehovah's Witness doubting doctrine or anything like that, you can reach out to any of the extra Jehovah's Witnesses on this panel. As well as we recently did a live stream on the effects of suicide and shunning within the Jehovah's Witnesses. So before you think that you should take your life, due to the shunning policies of the Jehovah's Witnesses, reach out to any of the extra Jehovah's Witnesses here. As well as in our last stream, we had a lot of numbers that you could call for suicide hotline for any type of help in that area. So that would be Spencer's closing thought. Emma, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, kind of the same. I've run my group now for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses for 12 years, but I also let in other like there is, that's how I met Mary, because like there's a ex-Amish, there is ex-Mormons in my group, because we've all got something like in common, we've all been through the same. So if you're having any doubts, come join the group. I've also got a group especially for the public that want to learn more about Jehovah's Witnesses. If you've got them in your life or you want to know more about the beliefs, it's called Jehovah's Witnesses. What Jehovah's Witnesses? What do they believe? And that will give you more like in-depth information on the beliefs. So my group is Ex-Jehovah's Witnesses Unite. So if you have any doubts, if you're studying and you want to come and chat to people, then feel free to come and join.
Andrea?
Yeah. Man, I would recommend people go to the Protect All Children Facebook page, and there's also a group. There's a lot of people there that are very supportive and for ex-Mormons, and will help direct you to where you need to go for that. Sam Young is one of the admins for that, and has really taken this cause head on, of that children should not be groomed and set up for sexual abuse in any religion, let alone just the LDS religion. But of course, the group has a lot of Mormons, so there's a lot of support there. There's a lot to talk, so you can reach out there. And then of course, there's also lots of ex-Mormon groups. There's a lot of us. There's a whole lot of us that have left, and it's hard because something that takes up that much of your time every week and is intended to be basically your extended family, and then you leave, you're basically starting over. So yeah, if you have doubts, if you have questions, if you need support, there are so many resources, and you can contact me personally. I'm more than happy to direct you to whatever would be more specific to what your needs are. So, yeah.
Cal?
Sam did really want to come on, but he's gone away for the weekend, so he said you'll definitely come on a future show, because he opened my eyes to the whole Mormon thing.
All right, Cal?
Yeah, so I wish I had the kind of resources y'all do. I'm gonna be honest, once I left the church, I just kind of left it at that and walked away, and I didn't really get into any of the activism or anything. So I wish there were places I could direct people, and if anyone had any questions, I wish I could answer them, but I'll be honest, I'm not obviously the best person for that. What
would you say to people that are having doubts then?
I would say just think hard, think long and hard, look into it. There's a lot of things that just don't quite match up when it comes to big organized, especially Abrahamic religions. And, I would say, do your research. Hey, Joseph Smith, right? That's how he started the church, he says. He sat down and he prayed and he thought about it. So maybe pray if that's what you need. If you need God in your life and you think your church isn't doing it for you, do some praying, do some looking. Look for things that just don't add up. I'd also really quick like to say that I noticed specifically here in the comments here on the StreamYard channel, I believe it was Tanya and David had some very nice things to say, and I appreciate that. I didn't have it as bad as a lot of the other panelists here, and for that I'm grateful. But things are going to get better, maybe sooner than later, maybe later than sooner. But when you're not being guilted over every single thing that you do, and you're not always constantly worrying about a God with seemingly contradicting points, things are going to get better. And I'm a firm believer that whatever gets you through the day. Do you need a cigarette? Do you need God? Do you need whatever? If it's what gets you through your day, go for it. And some religions just aren't cut out for you. But if you need it, I recommend you find one that is.
We lost Spencer again.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry. I guess I was on mute. Tyler, did you have any final thoughts?
No, I guess I would just like to say, I mean, I don't know more I'm really going to have to add that hasn't already been said, but especially thank you to everyone that's on.
Did we lose Tyler?
I think it's froze. Oh,
There you go.
Awesome. No, reach out to some online community. The XJW Reddit has been huge. If you are a current Jehovah's Witness, jwfacts.com is a great resource for really the truth about what your religion really has been up to. So, again, thank you to all the different, the ex-Mormons, the ex-Amish. It's great to have people on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. And Molly, did you have any final thoughts before we go to Mary?
Yes, basically the same sentiments the others have shared. If you have doubts, reach out, and mainly, yes, hi, I'm the apostate your mama warned you about. I'm not trying to sell you to Satan. It's fine. You can interact with me, and I swear to God, I'm not gonna drag you down to hell. I'm not gonna like gut your kids and eat your liver or some shit like that. I'm not gonna drink your blood. I'm cool. I'm chill. I'm just a little bit gay, but other than that, you know, I usually can hang with anyone and everyone, as long as you don't try to, you know, shove your Bible down my throat. I'm gonna keep my atheism out of the conversation as well. Easy.
Thank you. You know what, Mary, you are giving me some good information here. I'm gonna have to see if I can flash this across the screen. Did you have some final thoughts? Mary, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. As far as the born Amish community, the people that are non-conforming, we don't have a lot of resources. It's been something that has been an ongoing problem. Most of the resources that we have is for example, I have a niece who became non-conforming. She joined another extremely conservative church, and when I came out of the closet, she kind of is no longer in my life because of that. So there's a lot of religious resources for people who are trying to leave the Amish, but you would have to conform to that religion. So it doesn't seem like we have any secular resources. Now, I do want to say, as far as the LGBTQ community, we do have a suicide hotline for them specifically through the Trevor Project.
Right.
That one is a really good resource if you ever need assistance, because sometimes you can get a less than helpful interaction with a suicide counselor if they maybe believe in Jesus or something like that. Sometimes they'll say things that just kind of make you fall off the deep end. And so it's good to have that for the LGBTQ community. And I'm hoping that one day we will get to a place where we have a secular group that will be prepared to provide resources and assistance to those who are not conforming Amish. But we're not there yet.
No, we're not. Most of the help groups or support groups are leaning toward religious. They're religiously themed. I would have to say that there is another one here. I'm going to see if I can grab their number. It's called Recovering Religion. If you guys are not familiar with that. But before, I'm going to dig up that number. And Cal, did you have a final thought?
Yeah, I'd just like to say one more thing,
Sure.
and I'll try and keep it very brief, but, something that I have no statistical backing for this, but I think something that is very common in organized religion, and especially religions with cultish behavior, is it kind of makes your mental place not where it should be. It really instills a lot of guilt in you and a lot of doubt in you. And when I was young, I had a lot of depression issues that I didn't recognize as that, and I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't have a great way to go about searching for any help for that, and I kind of resisted help anywhere I could get, and it got to the point where I have in my life had a loaded firearm in my mouth before, and no one should get to that point, you know. And if you're in a religion, you know, we got these numbers flashing. I was always just too nervous to even try. And you shouldn't be. There's nothing wrong at all with getting help. But recently in my life, within the last couple of years, I've been seeing, you know, professionals about it, and you should absolutely be doing that. You know, and if people, you know, you're going to get the people in your life who are going to say, suck it up. And for some people that works, but I wholeheartedly recommend that you do. And there's the numbers going up on the screen as well. If you Google suicide hotline, they do have a chat, and whatever you can do, if you can get to see someone, do it. If you can't, don't be afraid to call hotlines. Don't get to the point where I was. And I couldn't tell you if where I was because of my religion or because of just what's going on up in the noodle bowl. But I would say, don't let yourself get there, because that's a horrifying place to be. And it's bad. Just do seek help. Don't be nervous. Don't be ashamed, especially. Do not be ashamed, because people are going to be like that. You might just be like that. Sometimes it's genetic. Sometimes it's just due to the way you were brought up. But please don't get to that point. Do find the help that you need.
Thank you so much. And that is very important because as we talked about before in our live streams, that a lot of people have killed themselves over the policies of certain religions because of their lack of support. If you need support, the Recovering Religion Peer Support Hotline is now on it. It's kind of simple. There are if you go to their website, the Recovering Religion website, they have a lot of support for you, and they have numbers for you in the UK and a bunch of other numbers here. I couldn't fit them all on the screen here. Thank you so much, Cal. Thank you so much, Andrea, Mary, Tyler, and everybody that joined us on the panel today. Thank you for sharing your stories and trusting us with your stories on this platform. We want to thank everybody in the comments, everybody on Periscope, Twitter, YouTube. I don't know. I didn't see too many YouTube people from our YouTube people today. So that's a little concerning. I don't know if that has to. You're right. I don't know if that was.
He's upstairs, so we'll see if he was on. I don't know.
The YouTube link is the one I sent to my grandpa, so maybe he was there. I don't know.
Maybe so, or maybe y'all just quiet.
Grandpa, ignore the sex stuff I talked about, please. Ignore that one.
I'm impressed you watched, to be honest.
Yeah.
If you're watching upstairs, hey, I'll be up in a minute.
All right, guys. So we're gonna go ahead and sign off and say goodbye. Make sure you join us next week.
Bye.